are we going to have something serious between Israelis, even the US backing Israelis, fighting Yemenis, fighting Houthis?
Yeah, the scale of the outrage over the Houthi attacks on shipping and the consequences to that, these major carriers uh, stopping their routes or having to go all the way around Africa is a big deal and has enormous financial consequences for the Western economies. And so the outrage because of that, say in comparison to what Israel is doing in Gaza, is really, it's illuminating. And I think what you've seen is the Houthis hit on a good strategy in the sense of trying to extract some concessions from the West, try to extract some type of payment from the West for their support for Israel's ethnic cleansing in Gaza. So it's having, I think, the desired results. It's causing a lot more attention to the isolation of the U.S. and some of its allies, internationally. It's juxtaposing the nations that are attempting to do something about this genocide versus those who are either remaining silent or are directly supportive of it, such as the United States. So where it goes, it's easy to see how this can turn into U.S. airstrikes in Yemen, going after drone and missile launch sites, going after command and control facilities, the usual list of targets we've heard for decades now whenever the United States does something punitive or wants to diminish or degrade an adversary's military. It's likely, I think, we'll see that. We'll also see, this increased naval presence and a real pressure on these shipping companies to go back to their usual routes to show the world that things are not just normal and not just to reassure economies and markets and not just to get this story off of the world's media websites and newspapers and TVs, but also to show that the United States is and its vassal allies are still the hegemon, that we are still the superpower, and that we cannot entertain any type of offense, particularly one that hurts financially. So that, I think, will ultimately, to me, be what the U.S. is most concerned about is, putting down this type of uprising against, the American empire.
We are seeing the Biden administration that was supposed to be some sort of opposing the Netanyahu administration. We have the leftist part of the Democratic Party, the socialists, progressives, people of the left who supported Joe Biden to win the election. And right now, he's not taking care of these people who are now supporting Cornel West, Jill Stein, even the people who are considering to vote for RFK Jr., even those people. Most of them are not supporting the Netanyahu administration's policy in Gaza. But it seems to me it's so amazing. Biden doing everything perfectly to support the Netanyahu administration. And nobody seems to care why the Democratic Party, why the Biden administration is getting so much in hand of the Netanyahu administration.
This is the consequence of many decades of an intertwining of U.S. Israeli relationships to the point that they're almost indistinguishable, to the point that they become much more than practical relationships or transactional relationships, but incestuous relationships. There was very little, I think, that Joe Biden could do with respect to Israel based upon the real constraints of his office, of the American political system, of the way the American government has been operating, about the way the empire operates. The idea that somehow Biden was going to have other choices other than fully support Israel, it's just not realistic in the American political sense. Now, of course, Biden was going to support Israel because he's a Zionist, and he believes in the mission of Greater Israel. And so personally, he believes in this. But I believe any president in that position would be supporting Israel the same way Joe Biden is, and not just with the material support, but as you were alluding to, Nima, with the political support, the media support, the diplomatic support, the fact that we are going along with, no matter what the Israelis do or say, we will send our most senior officials, our Secretary of State, our Secretary of Defense, over to Israel, and they will supplicate and they will be subservient and they will agree with what's being done. They'll be given the opportunity to make some statements that vaguely or very weakly call for Israel to follow international law or to protect civilians. But of course, what's then said is just praise for Israel and a continued assurance that the U.S. will not put no conditions, no limits, no timeline on anything the Israelis want to do. So it's all a show. But the domestic political realities of of the U.S. have made it so that opposing Israel in any form is near impossible. So what you see is the consequence of that, of being basically the president is held hostage to these policies because of the system that we've constructed, both with our domestic politics as well as with how we have decided to maintain our empire.
Israelis are considering fighting Hezbollah in the north. What's your assessment of what's going on right now? It seems that Hamas was not that weak and unprepared as we thought they would be.
Well, I think the Israelis are a very risk-assessed military in the sense that they do not, say, as compared to, say, the Russian or Ukrainian armies, send troops right into the teeth of a defense. So the Israelis, as they advance, they're utilizing heavy amounts of firepower, ensuring any threats are destroyed before their troops are exposed. So this is why over the course of 2 months, you could have a fairly low casualty level. Now, there have been some reports that casualties among the Israeli Defense Forces are much higher, particularly the number of soldiers wounded and those requiring amputations. And that would certainly make sense as the Israelis don't have as many armored vehicles as, say, the American military does. So you'll see video of Israeli soldiers in unarmored vehicles that would be very, very susceptible to improvised explosive devices, which is something that Hamas utilizes, just as any insurgent army has utilized for as long as there has been gunpowder. The way Hamas is fighting with a deliberate defense is also something that is planned, and that is how they see their best chances of they're not going to be able to trick or completely weaken the Israeli army, but cause so many casualties that it causes public angst in Israel that the Israeli government would pull their troops back. So in a sense, both sides are taking their time in how they're fighting and hoping Hamas is hoping that this can be stretched out to a point that it affects Israeli public opinion. The Israelis, of course, want to take as long to destroy Gaza as they need to, take as few casualties, keep that public opinion supportive of what they're doing, and move in a deliberate, systematic manner, destroying every square meter that they can. Serving an immediate tactical purpose of eliminating Hamas, who are fighting them, but also too that larger strategic purpose of making Gaza uninhabitable. Right. So what the soldiers are doing as they advance with the way they destroy everything, again, serves that immediate purpose of protecting themselves, killing Hamas, but also to that larger purpose of making sure that there is nothing left. That you have no choice but to go to Sinai because you can't live here. But that's how I see the strategies of the two. Certainly, both sides are trumpeting claims about how well they're doing against one another. And I think there's probably merit in both of those claims. But the way Hamas will continue to fight them is the way we've seen. And Hamas has experience from a time in Syria, and of course they have great experience from resisting against the Israelis for 3.5 decades now or so. And to your point, though, about that with the experience, to the point about experience, to what you were saying before about Hezbollah in Lebanon, a front against Hezbollah would be, of course, difficult. Israel has had very real troubles in Lebanon, defeats in Lebanon. So much of this goes back to what we saw happen in 1982, or what we saw happen because of the 1982 invasion of Lebanon by Israel. And so the fact that you actually have Israelis who think that pushing into Lebanon is a good idea, and that there won't be tremendous counterproductive blowback coming from that, like we invade. If people aren't familiar, Israel went into Lebanon in 1982 to go after the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and they pushed into Lebanon, which was in the midst of internal fighting anyhow. But it became a long occupation, a very bloody occupation, and the most counterproductive thing that occurs is that when the Israelis go into southern Lebanon, they are first met. In some cases, the Shia of southern Lebanon are happy to see the Israeli army because they don't want the PLO there as well. In other cases, the Shia are neutral towards it. And then some, of course, nobody wants to be occupied. So that feeling. But very quickly, the result of that occupation, the main result of that occupation is that the Shia turn against that occupation. And that's where Hezbollah comes from. So, and then of course, the 2006 invasion is another example of just, it just was not Israelis are not hanging their hats on that. So this idea that somehow they want to push into Lebanon is really makes you think that they have other ideas of how they would handle that, and it would not look like what we've seen before, where there's an attempt to occupy Lebanon, but rather, I think, if similar to what we're seeing in Gaza, is to destroy everything in southern Lebanon and make southern Lebanon, at least south of the Litani River, which is about 20 miles or so north of the Israeli border, make that southern portion of Lebanon a true buffer zone, a true no man's land. And this way, you don't have to have an occupation as you did before, and you still get that buffer zone. Of course, the alternative to all of this is negotiations and a political settlement, but that doesn't seem like we have anyone either in the U.S. government or the Israeli government who are interested in such, permanent and long-term resolutions to the issues.
Do you think that Hamas would simply leave that territory, that northern part of Gaza, southern part of Gaza, and go to Sinai? Is that possible, in your opinion?
Well, that's one of the stated objectives of Israeli policy, is the resolution of this Gazan problem for the Israelis, and the idea being to push the Gazans, into the Sinai, and to create basically a refugee city for them. And this has come up over and over again. This has been proposed by the Israelis a number of times. At one point, Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, so the successor basically to the PLO, in many ways, Abbas was presented this plan by the Israelis where he would be given the relocated people of Gaza, that the Gazans would be relocated to northern Sinai, an entire city would be built, including a shipping port, and that Abbas, in exchange for his cooperation, would be given control of that. And he declined it, of course. But this plan has come up over and over again. And the significant thing is that if you go and look at the White House's $14 billion supplemental request to provide aid to Israel. Within that, there is money included, part of the billions of dollars that go for humanitarian relief. A significant portion of that has been earmarked to build basically refugee facilities in Sinai. It doesn't say that specifically, but what it talks about the billions that are available, or the hundreds of millions that are available for the relocation, it's specifically referring to this idea of the Gazans leaving now, Gazans leaving Gaza and heading into Sinai and staying there, because of course the Israelis would never allow them to return. The thing about this, and we've seen this over and over again, because this is one of the great tropes and nonsensical accusations about the Palestinians, is that no one will support them. That because the Arabs, the Jordanians, the Saudis, whoever, the Turks, won't let them come en masse to their countries, means that somehow these people are inherently rejectable, that there is something genetically wrong with them, that they are not human beings. No one would want these people. That's just one of the tropes you hear all the time. The reality is that why would those nations agree to take part in ethnic cleansing? One, their populations would not allow for that, but also two, just the idea of going along with Israel's ethnic cleansing. Why would we think that Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iraq, whoever will go along with such a plan? And then you also have other concerns. The Egyptians certainly don't want Hamas in Sinai for a number of reasons. One, they're having their own economic difficulties. Egypt's economy is in a terrible place right now. So the absorption of 2 million more people would really put a strain on, that's going to put a strain on your country. But also, too, remember, Hamas is a reactionary religious movement or force. And they may not be as opposed to Egypt's dictatorial government under al-Sisi as they are to Netanyahu's occupationist government. But, there's not going to be too much time before Hamas is agitating, organizing, and making efforts against the Egyptian dictatorial government, and they know that. So for that reason alone, you can't imagine the Egyptians wanting to bring these people in. And then, the other point of it too is, why would we expect dictators, monarchs, these leaders throughout the Arab world, the Gulf world, Turkey, etc., to have the heart, this big compassionate heart, to have these people come into their country? I mean, so the whole idea of it is just really fraught with illogic, impossibilities, and a desire, though, is what this is shown to, make this ethnic cleansing campaign be truly realized.
I remembered of the cluster bombs that they've sent to Ukraine. They said that they are taking care of this ammunition, that the Ukrainian army is not using them against civilians. Right now, Jake Sullivan said all these ammunitions that the United States are sending to Israel, they are taking care of Israelis to not use them against civilians. As someone who has a lot of experience in this field, how can that be verified?
Well, in the sense of whether or not the Israelis are using the weapons against strictly military targets, as opposed to indiscriminately bombing and slaughtering as many as they can in a bombing campaign of organized murder. It's right there in front of us. It's right there in front of us. Who are we going to believe? Jake Sullivan or our own lying eyes? I mean, the idea that we're supposed to swallow this nonsense, that somehow Israel is being precise in its attacks and it's going out of its way to protect civilians, and its troops are moral, upstanding, professional warriors. And then we see the videos, the constant videos of just a brutal, horrific campaign of terror against trapped people, against people that are trapped. I mean, you wouldn't do this to this is the equivalent of putting animals in a cage and shooting them. I mean, this type of just disgusting this evil that we're witnessing. And the greater evil comes from the smug arrogance, the conceit of people like Jake Sullivan, who lie so willingly to ensure that this murder this barbarism, this terror is not upset. It's not delayed. It's not diminished, and it's not put to an end. I mean, so it's revolting to see this. It's frustrating. Many of us are incredibly angry, so angry I can't even get the words out, right? Um, and at times, though, I will say the one thing I have found, Nima, is that those of us who are not taking part in this should be proud of ourselves for not taking part of us. Those of us who are not being complicit, who are not supporting this, who are opposed, who are voicing our opinions, who are getting out in the streets, we should take pride in going against, particularly in nations, Western nations like the U.S., where there is such a narrative. And when you are met with this idea that you are pro-Hamas or pro-terror, or you're an anti-Semite because you are speaking on behalf of a people who are being murdered, it does take some wherewithal and some fortitude to get out there in face of our culture. But we're seeing so many doing that. And so even in spite of the suffering, this horror, this terror, I think we can look and we can see how there are pathways coming out of this in the future that lead to a better planet. One of it's whether the American public's willingness to not give our government the benefit of the doubt, particularly in war. I mean, we've seen that diminish greatly over the last 15 years. And you saw how immediately half of the United States was in favor of a ceasefire. More than half, 70% of the United States was in favor of a ceasefire. And that is in spite of all the incredible Israeli propaganda, the mass disinformation, the cheerleading for a bloodlust from American politicians and American major corporate media in support of Israel destroying the Palestinian people. So in spite of all that, you see 7 out of 10 Americans saying this is wrong, it needs to stop. And then now you've seen and there are other polls out there as well that support that more Americans are supportive of an end to this than are not. And again, that's in the face of not just the immediate propaganda coming from the U.S. government, U.S. media, but also, too, from decades of a political culture in the United States that hasn't just championed Israel, it's made it criminal to not be supportive of U.S. policies towards Israel. So, in spite of all that, we have so many here who are standing up. And the reason for that, of course, is because of programs like yours, this technology that allows people to be educated, allows people to be informed. I don't think even 5 years ago you would have had this degree of support for the Palestinians in the United States. Because I think it's just every year there's more information, more context, more background. American people know what's going on over there. And so every year that builds and that spreads. And again, it's because of the ability to share information as we can because of this technology we have.
Right now, Putin, in his latest press conference, said Odessa is a Russian city. From autonomy for Donbass coming to the Odessa is a Russian city, and they can do nothing about it. And they were not willing to negotiate with Russia. People even start thinking what Trump could have done that would be worse than what Biden have done.
Absolutely. In this case, I'm not sure what more Trump could have done to support the Israelis than Biden's doing. We simply can't provide them with any more munitions with bombs and rockets and bullets as fast as we are doing right now. And with regards to larger foreign policies, such as say this debacle in Ukraine, and debacle is a polite word, but I mean just the enormous suffering of the Ukrainian people, what they have sacrificed for NATO and the American empire is legion, is just it's massive what they have sacrificed as pawns as part of a strategy that ultimately Western strategy, which is led by the Americans, which is the American empire basically, excuse me, NATO as a subordinate faction of that. it's a strategy that is one that's really built upon hope. And it's really predicated on two foundational aspects of American foreign policy strategy. One is short-term domestic political considerations, which includes, the role of the military-industrial complex in American politics and the American media, how important that is. And so you have, in this case, say, foreign policy that is uh, recognizes the reality of, say, the Israeli lobby within the United States. The fact that you can have members of Congress who voice opposition to a genocide be threatened by a lobby, as we are seeing a foreign lobby, is something that should be a constitutional crisis in the United States. And it's not. So what you have is you have the squad, the Democratic progressives, known as the squad, who are being threatened with $100 million put against them in the 2024 election. I mean, so you're talking, and that's a tremendous amount of money for election campaigns, that some of them might be a total of $2 million, $3 million. So this idea that a lobby representing a foreign government is going to do this, and they're openly stated it. And that's so you understand how that drives American foreign policy. That's a huge consideration for both the Democratic and Republican parties. And then as well the wishes of the military-industrial complex too. You never can diminish emphasizing that. But then the other aspect of the other foundational part of American foreign policy strategy is ideology. And it's not even ideology. It's a religious identification of who America is. So it's American exceptionalism. And you take that with all the other aspects of being an empire, all the other needs, requirements, desires, realities of being an empire, stretched back throughout human history. And then you couple it with that religious identity, which I think was the case in many empires, right? But you have a decision-making process that is always corrupted. That you don't have you have a decision-making process that is based upon, at the minimum, maintaining the empire, and at best expanding the empire. And so any options that don't directly pertain to that or don't seem to fit in that is just not something that can be even recognized. It's just not accepted. I mean, the idea that somehow that the answer, of course, to say what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea is stop supporting Israel's genocide against the Gazan people. But that type of answer, that resolution, that understanding, I mean, you can't get within 3 miles of the White House to say that. I mean, it's just you would be considered. I was having this conversation this morning with a former colleague, and the same thing too. Our conversation is considered not serious conversation in Washington, D.C. The idea that you are presenting options, or not even options, is an understanding of the situation that is anathema, that is contrary to the narrative of the American empire. You can't even be in the room to present that. That's just not allowed. So, I mean, I think that is, you understand those things, and you understand what we, the U.S., have constructed in terms of our foreign policy established, or our militarized foreign policy. And you get back to this idea that what other option had Joe Biden had? Not saying he would have chosen any other option, because he is a committed Zionist, as we said, but I mean, truly, what other option do you have? And that's why you come back to this idea of what do we have to do? And we have to reconstruct how we govern ourselves. We have to get money out of politics. I mean, these are all the things we have to do if we want to take on, these aspects of the American empire that are killing millions, displacing tens of millions, committing moral horrors. And on a practical level, it's hollowing out America's economy, and it's making the U.S. less safe. We are isolated. We're probably gonna, from what I see, we're gonna veto the UN Security Council resolution again. So we are going to continue to have these economic policies, as well as our wars and our demands for nations to host our drones and our fighter planes and our commandos, so that nations are being pressured to find alternatives to the U.S. They're not just they're now desperate to escape American hegemony because they see it as so destructive. It's just not expensive. It just doesn't mean that they are losing in what the American empire always will see as a zero-sum game. But it's a fact that it is dangerous. It's very dangerous. The U.S. can't be trusted. They are not a guarantor of security. Right. So we've talked about this before, Nima, where other nations are looking at other alternatives, whether it's other nations, whether it's consortiums and nations, say like the BRICS. But all of this is a construction of American choices, and the more the U.S. makes choices that are counterproductive, detrimental, hypocritical, immoral, the more it causes these nations to want to get out from underneath the American empire, to find alternatives, or in some cases to outright fight it. So as the United States scrambles to maintain control, it's putting all this pressure on these nations that are making the circumstances worse for American interests. And so this is a complete reality of our own making.
Would the Democratic Party be successful in the next election in 2024 if they lose the left part of the party?
I think they are doing everything they can to lose people who identify as left-leaning, who don't identify as centrists, who identify as progressives, say, rather than liberals. They're doing everything they can to push those people away. The Democratic Party has long said, where are those people going to go? If you're a progressive, a leftist, even a socialist, what are you going to do? Who are you going to vote for? You're really going to vote for these unorganized third parties or these independent candidates that don't have a chance, and then you're throwing your vote away, and then they'll get in the whole, you get in the whole arguments of lesser evils, or a vote for the, not voting for our candidate is equivalent to a vote for the other candidate. All that type of illogic and specious argumentation that can have an effect, though, in terms of keeping people in your party. But the problem is that you keep lying to them, you keep leading them along, you keep being deceitful and manipulative, and they're going to start noticing, and they're going to leave. And that's what you've seen. You've seen one broken promise after another to Americans on the left, whether it be on a whole host of things. And then the other aspect is you have where you are lied to, where, so many of us see the reality of the American economy for our family, for our friends, for former coworkers or fellow classmates, and you see how hard it is. And then you're told that you are repeating Russian propaganda because you are pointing out that we have 150 million Americans who live paycheck to paycheck, that even a majority of Americans who make over $100,000 a year are living paycheck to paycheck because everything is so expensive. You're confronted with this type of gaslighting where somehow you don't understand economics if you're including past year's inflation to understand quality of living and cost of living and expenses. How dare you look at an inflation rate or a wage or where wage growth is based on any type of historical trend that would actually have an impact on a person or a family's real finances. So you're dealing with that. You're basically the expression we have here in the U.S. is, they're pissing on your leg and telling you it's raining. And so that type of frustration, and then you have something like the U.S. Role in Israel's genocide and the Palestinians on the Gazans, and that's enough for many millions of Democratic Party voters to maybe vote for Jill Stein or Cornel West. That may cause them to vote for RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., even though his views on Israel are as abhorrent as Joe Biden's. But if that makes it all equal for you, then maybe you will vote for RFK Jr. because, okay, he's just as bad as Biden's just as bad as him on Israel and Palestine. So, that takes away any concern I have. It equals it out for me. But you're also going to have, too, in this calculus, the presence of potentially Joe Manchin or a No Labels Party candidate. And unlike RFK Jr. and Cornel West, and also Jill Stein, because the Green Party has limited ballot access. In the United States, for people who aren't familiar, in every state, you have to get your name onto the ballot. And so, you have different requirements. Many of them are based upon signatures. You have to go out there and collect signatures. And it is a fraught, difficult process meant to keep outsiders out, meant to keep independents and third parties off the ballot, meant to protect the Democratic and Republican parties' monopolies over over their constituents. So bringing in a party like No Labels, which is achieving ballot access around the country because it has so much corporate money behind it, that means that if Joe Manchin or whoever does run, he'll be on the ballot in many states. While I feel that most American voters won't have an opportunity to vote for RFK Jr. or Cornel West because as independents, they weren't able to get onto the ballot in their state. Some states they will, some states they won't. But all that calculus, you put it all together, and then you look at certain communities, such as the Arab community, they're not going to vote for Joe Biden. In the past, many of them would have. And you look at a state like Michigan, which has a very high Arab population, and the idea that the Arab vote's not going to turn out in a battleground state, in a close electoral state like Michigan, that's a real problem for the Democrats. Now, again, you have these other options, and maybe people will pursue other options, and many people will just say, I'm not showing up. One thing is clear: the base of these parties are loyal to their candidates, loyal to their party. And you see this even on Israel-Gaza things. If you looked at a few weeks ago, there was a poll, not the recent New York Times poll, but there was another poll. It might have been a Reuters poll. I can't remember which. But basically, it showed that almost 80% of Democrats wanted the ceasefire in Gaza. But almost 70% of Democrats said they approved of Joe Biden's handling of the war in Gaza. So what you see in the base, and the other thing was true for the Republicans. It was mirrored, where you had a plurality of Republicans not wanting a ceasefire, but you also had a very high number of Republicans not wanting a ceasefire, but you had extremely high number, equivalent number, 80% or so of Republicans saying Joe Biden is, they don't approve of his handling of Israel and the Palestinians. And so what you see then is you see all these Democrats still supporting Biden in spite of the fact they are doing not what he's doing not what they want in Israel and Palestine. And the same is true for Republicans. Many Republicans disapproving of Biden, even though he's doing exactly what they want him to do in Palestine. And so you see, this is why you can see something like back in the fall when Joe Biden's campaign launched its first campaign ad, and it was a minute-long thing on what a hero he was because he was the commander-in-chief visiting Ukraine. He's standing up to the tyrant Vladimir Putin. He's defending democracy. You could look at that with falling poll numbers for support for Ukraine, a Western proxy war that has clearly failed. And, why is this their first campaign ad? Well, because his base, this is what they want. They want to see him as a fighter. They want to see him as a champion. They want to see that linear connection of Trump equals Russia, right? Like that type of stuff. Excuse me. So, you have all these considerations that are affecting Democratic Party voters, all this understanding. And also, but the reality is that not many Democratic Party voters don't have to show up to have a big impact on the election. And this is one last thing I'll say is this reminds me very much, though, the idea that the Democratic Party, the DNC, leaders of the Democratic Party are so willing to disregard the reality of life for the American people. It reminds me of how in the 2016 election, depending upon what study you look at, but between 8 and 12 million voters who have voted for Obama in 2012, in 2016, then voted for either Trump or didn't vote at all, stayed home. And, same thing. People were hurting. People, and the Democratic Party just refused to acknowledge it, and they lied about it. And you see that now as well. And so I wonder how much of that will be the case where of the, I think it was 80 million voters Joe Biden got in 2020, how many will stay home? How many will shift their votes to somebody else? And again, it won't take very much to lose him the election.